at one point I had to make a living, so I always had a job, which was very politically incorrect back then.
Hello there, and welcome back.
What is this place?
Disconnected.
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 Disconnected. Disconnected.
Disconnected.
Disconnected.
Disconnected.
Disconnected.
Disconnected.
Disconnected.
Disconnected.
I'm starting to feel disconnected.
You have reached a number that has been disconnected.
Hello there, and welcome back to the Disconnected. I honestly don't even know how to introduce this because I'm here with one of, in my opinion, the most esteemed, incredible contributors to the horror genre over the last, we're at 40 years. That's kind of crazy to say out loud like that. Mr. Brian Yuzna, thank you so much for being a part of this.
Nice to be here.
I don't even know where to start. You've had a hand in so many incredible things over the years, from producing titles with massive pedigree like Dolls. I love Dolls, one of my favorites of all time. Writing on things like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and following that up with one of the most disgusting shots put in film in society. We all thank you for it.
Well, thank you for enjoying them.
So you have such an interesting and globe-trotting, diverse background that got you to the entertainment industry. How do you feel you got here? What is the first handful of steps that really got you to where you were established?
You mean being able to make money making movies? Even
just getting to movies. I mean, growing up in other countries and then working as a carpenter and all of that.
Well, growing up, I grew up, there were movies. There were movies everywhere. So I grew up, but then we didn't have TV when I was a kid until I was about 7 or 8, because they didn't have it in Panama where I lived. But we went to the movies. One of the first movies when I was very young that I think I must have been 6 or something. I think. Maybe even earlier. Maybe 6. Anyway, we used to go to the movies on Sunday, the kiddie matinees.
Nice.
And I saw The Creature with the Atom Brain. And it just really, gave me sleepless nights.
Nice.
And then the next, fantastic movie, genre movie I remember was The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad.
Oh, wow.
And that was, and the skeleton part really scared me and and gave me nightmares. And then, of course, the woman jumping into the urn with the snake and coming out as the snake woman.
Yeah.
Was very disturbing to me. I didn't quite know why. And then another big genre movie that was very influential to me around that same era when I was, in grammar school was the Ten Commandments.
Oh, interesting.
Which was which you would think that's, it's a biblical epic.
Yeah.
And it was made for all audiences, back then. But it had all this kind of real genre stuff, like rods that get turned into snakes and turning the sea red, blood, and then this green smoke going through the village, killing children, and the sea opening up and all this stuff.
So it's a horror movie.
Like a big genre movie. But then when Moses goes up to Mount Sinai, all the Israelites worship this golden calf and start having a big orgy. Now it was, I guess, G-rated, but it was an orgy, and that really affected me. And when I did start making movies, I would often try to figure out where my default instincts came from, because I think everybody's coming from something. Most people that make movies, even on the huge level, are trying to make movies they loved when they were kids.
Of course.
And I think that's why I have this propensity to think that a good movie should end with a big crazy orgy, because of the Ten Commandments. That's how it ended,
Well, thank God for that.
It wasn't good. What they were doing was clearly not good. But it was very satisfying. I mean, Moses comes down and puts an end to it, so it's not like it's a horror movie. It ends well, So anyway, and I saw all the like the House on Haunted Hill and the Tingler and the
Universal and William
Hammer
Castle
was coming out then. I saw when I was at first, I only saw the trailers of Hammer, but that was pretty scary. And then, of course, I saw all the Hammers. But by the time I got to middle school, I was all into the Corbin's Poe series. And, I saw Psycho when it first came out, and I was like,
nice.
11. Yeah, that. Boy, I couldn't take a shower for weeks and all that kind of stuff. It's very disturbing to me, this idea that there could be somebody else inside you,
Yeah.
But so anyway, I read, I was really into fairy tales when I first started reading. And that's basically the origins of, I guess you'd call it folk horror. I think all
absolutely.
horror kind of comes ultimately from folk horror. And when I was a kid, not having TV, and if we did have it, it'd be a few hours a day and just be kind of like the news and stuff. But we used to gather, at dusk, the kids, and somebody always knew some uncle somebody crawled out of a grave, or there's some kind of voodoo, this sort of monkey's paw style of horror. It's just the whole grisly fact of it. And then I was raised a Roman Catholic and my father was a practicing Catholic. So I would go to church. I went to church faithfully, and I lived in, of course, these Catholic kind of third world countries where they'd have processions through the street. I mean, it's very heavy, and of course, in Catholicism's all about eating the flesh and drinking the blood, and suffering, and so that, I think that had a good effect on me. I always thought that especially the Western kind of horror basics of Frankenstein, Dracula, and I guess Jekyll Hyde or the werewolf kind of blend together. That it works best in a kind of Christian Roman Catholic tradition, because in the Catholic tradition, the devil and the demons are real. This is not bullshit. This is for real, and so it's not much of a jump from there to thinking that vampires could show up.
It's true.
And I always thought it kind of took a little away from it when it would get to, when it didn't have that sort of religious underpinning. But then when you'd see the Asian non-Christian based horror, you'd see that they do quite well with their vampires and werewolves and ghosts and stuff.
Yep.
You just have to settle into the the culture of it. But that was kind of how I think that's how I got a taste for horror. I just always liked it. Yeah. And then when I ended up having to make a living, I didn't grow up anywhere near LA. And back in the 50s, 60s, even 70s, movies were just basically made in LA and to a certain degree New York.
Right.
But mostly LA. And I didn't know anybody in the movies. All I knew was from what I could read, but I remember seeing Day for Night, that Truffaut movie. In the 60s, art movies were a real big thing. That, that new wave stuff, auteur stuff, was just real entertaining. And in Day for Night, it's basically kind of a musical about making a movie. So you see the crew making the movie, and you see all these different people performing functions. And that sort of became the basis of what I knew about what making a movie was. But I never thought that, it never occurred to me that you could actually make a living doing TV or movies. It just seemed too far-fetched. Of course, now everybody can and everybody does make movies, always, all the time, constantly. But when I started shooting with a 16 millimeter camera when I was given a Bolex 16 millimeter wind up 3 lens. These were these Bolex cameras that were used for news gathering in the 70s. When a crew would go out to do the news, they would have that. And they didn't have sound or anything. It was just, and you had 3 lenses, and you wound it up for like 100 feet. I got one, and at that time I was living in the country, and I started shooting my goats and my turkeys and stuff. And then I'd project it at night on my projector after I developed it. It would be in black and white.
Yeah.
I went, wow, that's like Bergman. This is a movie, And so then I started, I tried making a short film, and because I got a Betamax.
Nice.
The first in my neighborhood to have a Betamax. And then I recorded a couple movies and watched them over and over. One was Kubrick's The Killing, and the other was The Spiral Staircase.
Wow,
and
nice.
For the first time, I could see that there's shots. There's not just scenes, there's shots.
Yep.
And that was a big eye-opener for me. That then I started realizing, because I could go back and forward.
Right.
I could control it. When I went to the movies, it just happened.
It's an experience to watch over you.
As close as I could get, because I wanted to get inside it. Of course, once I started making movies, I wanted to see the frame.
Yeah.
I went just the other way. I don't want to be immersed in it.
Yeah.
But so anyway, that was, I started getting interested in it and started reading like Box Office Magazine and Weekly Variety, and going, God, maybe could you make I'll try making a movie. I did a short film. I thought it was great till I showed it to my friends. And then it turned out it wasn't, And I'm like that as a cook, too. When I cook for myself, it's just delicious. But if I have to share the meal with somebody, I start realizing it's not that good, And so then when I decided to try to make I thought I'm going to try to make a real movie. I'll go out. And so I put an ad in Variety that said horror movie director wanted. And I got, this is before fax machines. This is like 1982. I got like hundreds of letters. I would say 90% were from LA and 10 or 20% were from New York. Well, New York was easy because I could drive up there from North Carolina.
Right.
But LA, I'd have to fly out for a few days, and I'd just have meetings all day. And then I started realizing that everybody that I met out there was just like me. There were people who were from somewhere else, but they wanted to make movies.
Yep.
And of course, the ones I met were the ones that wanted to make genre movies. And, not having gone to film school or ever had any any kind of education in entertainment. I just picked it up from meeting people. And the first time I went to a film market, it was the American Film Market. And when I saw that, I went, oh, this is how you do it. You kind of make the movie, you go and sell it to all these countries, because this was the great era of video when anybody could go to market with your movie, which is kind of why the movies of the 80s have this unique characteristic.
Yep.
They were being financed by video when the majors wouldn't get into it. And so there's a lot of people making companies producing and selling movies who would never be let into the big, could never have worked in the big time. You know, once I saw how that worked, everybody was kind of doing it.
Right.
And I was lucky because I raised the money to make my own movie so I could start out at the top, you know.
Smart man. That's a good choice. So around this time, one Stuart Gordon came into your life. Obviously, Stuart has passed now, and a lot of people have really begun to discover the magic that Stuart was. And you and Stuart had a lot in common. I mean, showing, you know, these crazy practical effects that are depraved and terrifying, but also with this just amazing sense of humor with it that we all come to love. Tell us about Stuart Gordon those early days. What did you like about it?
When I was looking for a director, it eventually led to me going to Chicago and meeting Stuart, who at that time was had been working for 10 years in theater.
Yeah.
So he had never made a movie, but he was a professional. He was the creative director of his own theater, and he loved to shock people, because the first time he really got his picture on the front page of the paper in Madison, Wisconsin, where he went to college, was because in college he put on a theatrical play version of Peter Pan where all the actors were naked. You got to remember, this is in the hippie times.
Right.
And so the police shut it down, and there was a lot of noise, and Stuart loved it. You know? He was like, this is what I want, you know. And in the organic theater that he ran, he did just regular plays, but he did really ambitious sci-fi and kind of horror stuff. And I went to see a couple of them, and I thought, wow, this guy, I could work with him, and he knows what he's doing, you know. And so he had already co-written a pilot for a Reanimator TV show. And so we developed it into a feature and shot it. We, luckily for both of us, he was, of course, I knew he was excessive. So I liked that. And I also he was lucky that I did want that.
Yeah. And
we didn't have to argue with anybody. And I wanted it to be very exploitative, because as a horror fan, I like bad horror movies.
Of course.
And not bad regular movies, but bad horror movies I like. And which I think is the definition of a horror fan. So I thought, you know, I'm risking, I had 2 kids by then. I thought, man, I'm risking my family's future because I'm borrowing money. So I know when I watch horror movies, the worst thing are the horror movies that sort of pull their punches thinking they're going to get some kind of respect.
Yep.
So my feeling was that and I told him this, I said, we just have to make it real entertaining, which means very bloody and very sexy.
And it works. And
just all the way, so that if the movie's no good, I know there'll still be an audience for it.
Yeah.
You know, so that was the, you know, and luckily, of course, I didn't even I didn't choose to take it to the MPAA for a rating because
Right.
I knew they would just take out all
It's
the
pointless.
good stuff. And it meant it was different. We had to put an X rating on it because that's what you put if it wasn't rated. And now X is just sex, but back then it was also it was just anything that like
Obscenity.
It's like anything could be X-rated if it was just adult. That was the original idea of it, is it would just be adult because they only had G-rated, then R-rated,
Right.
But anyway, that's as Stuart used to say, we brought out the worst in each other. Well, we were really very different. I mean, Stuart is a lifelong kind of director, entertainer, put on shows. And I just sort of came into it, when I was 30 years old, going, hey, what else am I going to do? Let's try this. I learned from just being on the set and hiring people and going through the process, but I never had any, I didn't have any education in it. And Stuart was, I think he was kind of a born storyteller. Some people just tell a good story. You kind of want Stuart to be at dinner with you because he'll pick up the slack when you need a little entertainment.
Yeah.
Like he's like a raconteur. And so I think we complimented each other that way. We were, and as Dennis Paoli, his writing partner, would say, he said, Stuart and I could have made any kind of movie, but you wanted to do horror. Of course, whatever you start doing, that ends up being it.
Get stuck in it, yeah.
But that's not exactly true. I mean, Stuart already had the Reanimator pilot.
Yep.
Of course, it was for like all audiences, late night,
Right.
Back then, who wants to do TV? Nobody.
That's true.
Now, with the streaming services,
That's the prestige now.
Although I must say, I think a lot of there's horror. I mean, horror is just everywhere now. I mean, it's never been bigger, but in a way, it's for me, it's never been more boring. I just, I think I forgot to mention this. My first introduction to horror before I could read, the first time I got money to buy a comic book, I think I was 4 years old. I got a horror comic.
Wow.
And those horror comics were really kind of disturbing until I had got a little older and was introduced to Mad Magazine. And then I started understanding satire because all the horror comics, they were grisly, but the guys writing them were grown-ups and they were just joking around. I mean, they were so ironic and satirical. But of course, when first time I read Mad Magazine, I was shocked. They were selling. I think they had a fake ad to back then on matchbooks. They used to try to sell you a course in plumbing or electric, and they'd sell a course in bank robbing or embezzling. And I'd go, how can they do that? Oh my God, But you have to learn the concept of satire.
Yeah.
And I think when you, especially in the EC comics, which really laid it on thick, that's basically Return of the Living Dead of Dan O'Bannon is EC comics in the movies for the first time. Not the creep show stuff where they think or Batman TV series where they think the way you make a comic to a movie is by showing frames and going into them and having primary colors and putting cows. And no. But that whole idea of eating brains. Who eats brains? Nobody, except in the comic books, because that's funny. It's fun. It's grisly. People are always getting revenge on each other. I don't know. And to me, the horror was, I think the horror that I loved was kind of tended towards the carnival type of, carnival ride type of horror, where it's just a fun ride, It's just really entertaining. But I loved, Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist and the real kind of high-end horror.
Right. Well, you say horror today is boring. What do you feel like it's missing? What do you think we've lost since Reanimator?
I don't know, just the fun of it. I think people take themselves so seriously.
Yes.
Everybody's an author. Everybody's the movie isn't. It's not just a movie. It's not just a horror movie. It's really about something else. It's message forward.
Yeah.
Everything's like more than that. It's not, or it ends up being like The Walking Dead or something, where it's basically a soap opera with gore effects. Well, obviously it's got a huge audience. I'm not,
right.
I'm not, hey, I wish I made Walking Dead. but, for my money, I prefer to watch, Humanoids from the Deep.
Yeah.
And I'm not, and even stuff like Halloween was ironic. It was,
of course.
It wasn't, you didn't laugh at it, but it was just ironic. I mean, it was funny. How could this guy, he didn't just kill him, he had to put up a tombstone,
Knowing how you feel.
Then there's The Last House on the Left and the Hills Have Eyes, and those don't give you much room for irony.
Although Wes Craven classically has a lot of humor in his stuff too, so yeah, it's all there.
Well, with Freddy especially. Yeah.
Knowing how you feel about the current horror realm, are you watching much current stuff, or are you just kind of letting it go by?
No, I don't watch much. I mostly do books these days.
Oh, nice. What have you been reading?
Right now?
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of Elmore Leonard.
Oh, nice.
And, I'm always interested. If I see a movie I like, I'll get the book.
Yeah.
I mostly do audiobooks because then you can do stuff.
Of course.
But I'm always really interested in how a different story is done in different media.
Right.
And what choices are made. When I remember there was that movie, what's it called? Pretty Little Things or something? The one with the girl who's, when they put her baby's brain in her body or something.
Oh, Poor Things.
Poor Things, yeah.
Yes.
Well, when I saw that, and it has a lot of sort of brighter Reanimator stuff in it,
Yeah.
But, I didn't care much for the message forward. I think it's amusing that a movie that purports to be sort of a message forward feminist female empowerment movie basically creates the ultimate pedophile's dream in its main character. A young woman with a child's mind who just wants to fucking have orgasms. That's female empowerment. Okay. But anyway, so I immediately went and got the book and read it. And that explained a lot to me.
Nice.
Why it was the way it was. And the book is a found footage thing anyway, by the way. But when I read the book, then I thought, I think it came out in 91 or 92. And I thought, oh my God, if I had seen this back then, Stuart and I could have really had fun with this. I thought we would have jumped on it. What a good idea, But mostly I I don't see a lot, and I'm not one of those people that enjoys watching a lot of series. I don't binge series or anything.
Right.
So I don't know. I'm not a great movie consumer in my old age. When I was younger, I thought everything was fascinating. Any movie was just fascinating.
Yeah.
And now every movie is kind of boring.
What's the last one that really captured you that you walked away going, damn, that was genuinely fascinating?
I don't know. I can't remember. I can't think of anything.
That's pretty telling. You mentioned the sort of Bride of Reanimator aspects in Poor Things. How after 40 years of doing this, do you feel like your influence has left a lasting impression? Because clearly it has, with things like Reanimator and the even stuff like Return of the Living Dead 3 you can find in so many modern movies that were clearly something that played an influence on some of these filmmakers.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad that some of the movies I worked on are still being watched.
Yeah.
I mean, I think 3 weekends ago was at a screening of Return of the Living Dead 3 and Society.
Yeah.
Because I did the Q&A, And beforehand, I was part of a burlesque act where I got my guts pulled out and my brains eaten. You weren't there, but Jeremy was.
Yeah, Jeremy was there. I love that you're still so just happy to be a part of things like that, and a lot of people that made stuff like Bride of Reanimator by this time would have either, I don't know, famously calmed down and gone a little tepid, but you're just like, fuck it, we're just going to live in the genre and make the best of it, and that's so.
Well, if I was
incredible.
making movies, it might be different. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think there's something innate, So I don't know what I would do now. I'd probably not want to work that hard.
I
remember people telling me, older movie people, when I was in the midst of everything, that's say, why don't you direct a movie? And they'd say, God, you got to get up so early.
Yeah. Or stay up too late.
But when you're doing it, of course, I had kids and I had to work hard, but also I it was just pedal to the metal. Let's go,
Speaking of kids, in 1 year, you go, this is still so funny to me. You go from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, taking part in the creation of an iconic children's story, to Society, following that up on your resume. The shunting is right after this really beautiful Disney story.
Well, you got to remember that fantasy is just the other side of horror.
Exactly.
If you take Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and make it a little less bright and have a bad ending,
it's terrifying.
The Incredible Shrinking Man, or what's the one, Dr. Cyclops? Is it Dr. Cyclops, the one where he makes them all real little? Those movies were when Stuart and I just came up with Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, because we both have kids, and he said, let's make a movie for our kids. And so I said, when I was a kid, I was playing the grass with little soldiers. It just getting down by the tree trunk. Everything looked so huge, riding on a beetle, and he said, we'll call it Teeny Weenies. It's about kids that get shrunk by their dad and thrown out in the yard. And the story is they got to get home. And he said, we should take it to Disney. Well, Stuart had a really happening agent. And we were in Rome, and the agent said, you got to pitch for us at Disney. So we wrote the treatment on a yellow legal pad on the flight back from Rome, went into Disney, and it just rolled from there, except they told us pretty early on when they made the deal. They said, look, we're going to have to change the title. Teeny Weenies sounds like a low-budget porn movie. This was said by Jeffrey Katzenberg in the executive dining room.
Amazing. I love that. So with things that you've got this partnership with Stuart, and you're making all these relationships, and now you're coming in and going into established franchises where a first film has been made and adding to the canon. Was there ever innate pressure on you when you're stepping into Reanimator or Return of the Living Dead or Silent Night, Deadly Night to make something incredible for the fans of the first ones?
Yeah, I mean, especially Reanimator.
Yeah.
But the thing is, see, I wasn't someone, after making 3 movies with Stuart, then I tried making a movie of Dan O'Bannon, and then he backed out, and I had another one set up with Stuart, and he backed out. And then I thought, well, that's a good excuse for me to direct. So I can make the deal and make the movie, do it all. And but basically, I think anybody who's ever spent a lot of time on a movie set at one point goes, I'd like to direct. It doesn't seem that hard. I mean, it seems like the director gets to just make all these little decisions and everybody thinks they're wonderful. And they seem all very, seems sort of arbitrary.
Yeah.
And, but I knew that I could never get anybody to let me direct, except that I had I had the sequel to I own Reanimator. So I had the sequel. And so I found a friend of mine was starting up an independent production company. And I said, well, listen, I'll let you finance the sequel to Reanimator. But it has to be a 2-pick, but I have to direct, produce, be in charge, and all that. And but it has to be a 2-picture deal, because I had been told by a French distributor once that usually a first-time director makes 2 pictures in one, his first and his last. And so, because if you make a first movie, it's likely it's not going to be any good.
Right.
Stuart Gordon, to the contrary. Although, remember, Stuart was the theater director for 10 years.
Yep.
So I said, look, you can finance Reanimator sequel, but it has to be 2-picture deal, and that's the second one. So that way, the first movie, if I failed, I know I have another chance. I can learn from my mistakes. So it was basically just a logical idea. And then I was looking for a project, and a guy gave me the script of Society, and I really liked the paranoia of it, but it didn't have any fantastic element. It was just sort of like this blood cult. And so I had just been working with Dan O'Bannon for about a year on a project that he was going to direct called The Men, about a woman that discovers all men are aliens. A concept that in the 80s would have worked.
Yeah.
Today it wouldn't. Gender fluid doesn't work for those kinds of movies. And so it was, what I loved about it, it was very pulpy, but it was real paranoia. This woman starts realizing there's something going on that is under the surface, that is really weird. And so that's what Society had, was this idea that this kid's in Beverly Hills, and he's he's going crazy. He's going to see a shrink, He just thinks his parents are up to something horrible, and they are. But so that's why back then I just didn't think a lot. I just said, let's do this. And the money was coming from Japan, and there's a Japanese effects artist in Hollywood named Screaming Mad George. And I saw him, And we just started developing ideas. And I was at that time trying to think, I'm really into effects.
Yeah.
And if I was going to make a movie, it was going to have effects. And at that time, Nightmare on Elm Street was every new one that came out was just sort of, what the rubber guys could do now with all these new kind of materials and the new concepts of making replacement puppets by changing the angles so it could, without digital, that was always a problem. And
Of course.
when I watched The Werewolf, I just always wanted to watch the scene where he's growing the hair in his face, even though you could see it kind of shift, But that's the magic. It's the metamorphosis. I think maybe, and I thought, well, what effect haven't they done that I'd like to see? And I thought about the skin melding. And I think the origin of that might have been from seeing the late night movies on TV of Dr. X by Michaelxcreates.
Yeah.
And in Dr. X, they have a color sequence where he's got this synthetic skin. And it kind of melts his flesh together or something. So I think that maybe had some influence somehow. But anyway, I just imagined flesh melding together. And then when I met George, we just looked at all these Dali paintings. He's a surrealist painter. So then we started picking Dali images to build on. And then we'd have meetings at my house here with the writers, Rick Fry and Woody Keith. Woody Keith is now Seth Daniel. And we just started going in that direction. They weren't, they totally were good with it. There was no this is our image. No, there was none of that. And I think it was Woody who came up with the word shunting for the great ending.
Right.
And but it was only because I had The Bride of Reanimator as my leverage. And I was working with people who were just starting out, and nobody was around to say no. Nobody was like saying, do this, do that, or, so that made it, that made it possible to just follow that idea where it went. People, I think what people don't realize is that the shunting is one of the best guy in a suit movies ever,
Yeah.
I mean, I know The Creature from the Black Lagoon. I mean, that thing was swimming, but that guy was swimming. And I produced Guyver, which has the best, suit monsters doing martial arts you'll ever see.
It's incredible.
4K just came out last year.
More Screaming Mad George. He's all over the disc. Yeah.
Screaming Mad George and Steve Wang. But that shunting is basically 12 guys in a suit.
Yeah. That's
one big rubber suit with 12 people inside when you see the full thing. So that kind of puts it in a different context.
Yep.
You think about it that way, you go, oh, just a minute.
That Society is such an incredible movie, especially, we were talking about messages in a movie a minute ago, but looking back in a 2025 lens with, everybody shouting "Eat the Rich" and all of these stories happening, this was a huge part of this film. How do you feel like the theme lives, 40 years later?
I do think it, I was I was very conscious of the political part of it, because I went to college during the 60s great protests. Right. Everybody was political. It was a hell of a lot of fun because we were all 18 years old, and, or a lot of people were older, but I was 18, 20 years old. It was just, politics was great, turn on, tune in, drop out, and I did that. And so the idea, and so, and of course, it was all leftist politics.
Yep.
Back then, it seemed like the country was just going to explode, and I was a part of the left, and but I wasn't all that radical. At least a person in my personal life, I was, but politically, I had to make at one point I had to make a living, so I always had a job, which was very politically incorrect back then, and I kind of could see that you really wouldn't want the people on the fringe to run things. Well, today it's 180 degrees. Now the right is making the world seem like it's going to blow up. And you don't want those guys to run it. But you really don't want the ones on the far. I think you just got to get rid of the far ends.
Yep.
I knew that there was fun to be had because what I did was to take the script and just extended it to absurdity.
Get it excessive, like you said.
So it was about a kid in Beverly Hills, rich people.
Yep.
Rich people, and the guy who wrote it is that kid, Woody Keith. He was messed up, and he was very suspicious of what was going on, and was very well aware of that Beverly Hills society. His family was very wealthy, and so just taking that idea and extending it kind of made me think, well, I could make a new monster instead of Dracula, instead of the typical monsters that we have, that most movies are based on, I thought, well, this could be kind of fun to do a different monster, but I was very careful not to have someone get at a blackboard and give the message.
Right.
That's why I had the guy say, at the beginning of the shunting, when they get Billy, he says, alien scum. He says, we're not aliens. We're not from outer space or anything. We've been here as long as you, because I have a whole origin story for society.
Oh, man.
It goes back, it's like 2001, it goes back to the cavemen, right? Because I always feel like, especially, well, maybe any movie or any story, but especially genre where it's kind of science fiction-y, I kind of feel like the movie's just the part of the iceberg that you see, but it's got to have a huge, basis to it, but you don't want to be, it comes out when he says the rich have always sucked off poor, low-class shit like you. Well, that's kind of Marxism, but it's also just reality.
Life.
It's not when they released the movie in the UK where it was actually successful, I said, would you just put on the poster a true story? Because I think it is a true story. It's just, metaphorically speaking, but also there's not a real, I did have, back in the early 70s, a friend of mine in Berkeley used to put out these T-shirts that said, eat the rich, with like a plate and fork and knife. And Milo in the movie actually wears it to the party, but then he ended up having a jacket on. You couldn't see it.
Ruined it.
But in any case, it didn't matter. I wasn't trying. It wasn't, I just felt like it. That's not really the point of it. It's just the monster.
Yeah.
And and then because at the same time, so I just took what was already in the story and just kind of developed it more.
Yeah.
And then there was the kind of incest that was in there, the sister and the brother. And then at that time, I think I'd been reading this David Scull book about monster movies. The Monster Show or something.
Yeah.
And at one point he was saying, horror movies are about taboo. They're about taboos, whether it's cannibalism or violence or whatever. And that, and one of the earliest taboos that's still really serious is incest. And so then I thought, well, that's already a part of the movie. Let's bring it. Let's just get it, expand on it, make it stronger, and that is real creepy. The whole thing with the sister, and then with the parents, and it's real creepy. It kind of throws you, something's wrong here. You don't quite, why. But,
it's unnerving.
You don't really understand why we have such an aversion to it. But so anyway, that was how it started. It was sort of developing those kind of narrative ideas, but then in concert with George, who's coming up with different variations of flesh melding, and then Woody and Rick. They just had the weirdest kind of imaginations. So it was really just sort of a few witches around a bubbling pot. But it was very disappointing for me, because I thought when we made that movie, of course, I always think the movie, especially when I started out, I thought this movie's gonna, back then in Variety, they would put the box office, and they'd list the box office like Box Office Mojo and all that. And I thought it's going to be number one, but I didn't realize that my taste is not shared by a lot of people. And so if you're Spielberg, what he likes, we all love. I love most of his movies. His taste really, I respond, and so does almost everybody. But my taste, or Stuart's taste, or George's, you're getting into a much more limited number of people. Yeah. And when, Society and Bride kind of came out at the same time, because they were both made under the same deal. So the minute I was in post on Society, I was getting ready to shoot Bride.
Nice.
And I remember that Bride, even my friends kind of didn't like it, I mean, I'm not saying it's a great movie. I was pretty clumsy directing and all that, but it wasn't, but I thought that, it delivers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Hang in there, it delivers. But then, my friends did kind of like Bride of Reanimator. It's a little more traditional movie.
Yeah.
But then in the UK, where the UK it was released first in the UK because the company that bought the UK company liked it, so they bought the North American rights. That's why it was released later and ended up being out here later than it was in Europe. But they released it like a regular movie, and it got good reviews. They even brought Billy Warlock over, and it's this whole thing. Of course, back then this is pre-internet, so they'd send me a fax or something. Hey, blah blah blah, and I'd go, "Is this real? I don't know." What do you know?
Pranks by fax.
I'm not there, And it did, so it did well in UK and France and Spain, Italy. But then here it was like nothing. And so it was really, but then Bride over there, at least in the UK, wasn't seen as any great deal. I think it was more accepted here. But the thing that was really gratifying was about 20 years later, in the late 2000s, all of a sudden there was this other generation that came up in the Great Recession. And plus, they started liking the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
And I think what they liked was it's kind of like when I would watch Japanese horror, J-horror.
Nice.
The Ring and The Grudge and all that, which, by the way, the guy that I made Necronomicon and Crying Freeman from, the Japanese producer, actually created J-horror. He produced The Ring, The Grudge, he showed me the script to The Ring before he made it.
Wow.
So he was, the Japanese producer on the American remakes.
Yeah.
Very successful Japanese producer. And, but I'd tell my friend, I'd watch The Ring or something, The Grudge. And usually there's a girl with hair in front of her eyes crawling down a hall or out of a TV or somewhere, right? And you'd see the setup for it. And sometimes I'd go, well, that seems kind of illogical. That seems kind of stupid. Why would this person do that? And they'd go, it's Japanese. It's the culture. And I think that's what happened with society, is that the part of it that was bad, when it was in its era, they'd go, it's a little dicey there. But in another generation, they'd go, isn't that stupid? They'd say, it's the 80s.
It's the 80s.
You get absolved.
Yeah.
You get, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, it's just the 80s. And now they like all the rubber effects.
Of course.
And I think there's something attractive now. There's something more handmade about the 80s, because you had all these, it was mostly, there were just a lot of amateur filmmakers making movies with companies that were just started up by people who, it wasn't there was no curating by the business. And I think there's something clumsy about the storytelling. Let's watch The Thing, Carpenter's The Thing, and Kurt Russell has a cowboy hat out in Sub-Zero. Yeah, because that's cool.
It's the 80s.
That's why. But the effects are great in that.
Top notch.
Just groundbreaking stuff.
Yeah. We've talked about so many of your collaborations. There's so many throughout your story that are solid. Screaming at George Stewart. One of the big ones that we haven't really mentioned yet is John Penny. Worked on some films, and then the big thing I always am on here talking about physical media. And you guys just over a year ago now came out and announced Dark Arts. Can you share what that is and what is going on with it?
It is John Penny. I met him when I was trying to find a writer for Return of the Living Dead 3. Yeah. Which it was a whole, the Return of the Living Dead is just a fantastic movie. And the second one, it underperformed. And so the value went way down, which got it down to my level. And I was working with this company called Trimark. And at that time, I was working on Warlock 2, So I was working on the story, developing the story. I was going to direct it. And then they got the rights to Return of the Living Dead 3 and asked if I'd want to do that. I said, oh, yeah, because I've never been against doing sequels. Because I remember when Stuart and I were talking about Bride of Reanimator, and Stuart had big time representation. I've never had an agent, so that's how stupid I am. And he said, my agent says I don't do sequels. And I went, okay, because when you start out, you don't know where you're going.
Right.
Back then, the only sequels were like The Godfather, It wasn't like now where
everything
Marvel sequels can be a big thing. Yeah. And I said, okay. But I guess I never really expected that I would be able to make big movies as a director. And I just thought, boy, if somebody gives me a chance to direct a movie, I'm good. And if it's a sequel to something I like, I don't know, I'm happy to do it.
Plus, there's a built-in audience too.
So then I got a chance to do that, and then they said the only thing that it needed to have, didn't have to have the characters, the actors, none of that stuff. It just had to have the gas and the brainy. And for some reason, I mean, usually I get real into the irony and all the funny, and for some reason, I just wanted to have the main character be living dead to change the dynamic. Because I thought at 1992, there's just been too many zombie movies. What are you going to do? And so I had always thought that the Bride of Reanimator was the best character in that movie, but I didn't have confidence in her. I brought her in at the end like the Bride of Frankenstein. And she shows up and the movie's ending. And I thought, she needs her own movie, kind of. Right? And so that was sort of the one thing I wanted to do. And then I got pitched by many, many writers. And John Penny came in, and he had the story of the military weapon zombies and the freeze them with the bullet, and the other colonel who thought they should do it a different way, and there was a Romeo and Juliet. It was a kids on the run,
right? And
the girl was dead, and so, wow, that was it for me. And so we immediately started developing it and working on it. And we've been good friends ever since. And we work on a lot of stuff. And then about, a few years ago, everybody's making movies, and they make these no-budget movies. They call them micro-budget. And I can't be in that business. Nobody's going to work for me for free.
Right.
But I said, hey, we could sell them. Because I was a partner in a sales company in the 2000s. I think I started in about 2007 or something. So I wanted to get into sales, and because it's really hard to make a movie and then not be able to touch it.
Right.
And so you kind of, and actually selling movies is how you get movies financed. That's how you get the money, is by selling them. And so I kind of got into that. And then we started out at first with Dark Arts. We just started out being producers' reps. I said, there's all these people making independent movies, but they don't know how to make a deal. And I lived it, because when I made Reanimator, I unfortunately got a company to sell it and distribute it, who just kept all the money. And I had to sue them. Yes. And it was terrible. And because I didn't know, you read the contract, you don't know what the business is.
Plus no representation, like you said.
And so then what we would do at first, we would just say, somebody has a movie, and say, we'll set you up with a foreign sales deal.
Yeah.
And so we'll find someone to sell it for you, and we'll help you. We'll make the contract for you and make it a contract that's going to be good for you. And then we get a commission, like an agent or something. And so we start doing it that way, and then that kind of turns into doing North America, domestic, because a lot of those sales companies also do domestic. So then we start getting into that, and so then we just started thinking, we might as well just get into this, because we can. If when people would show me a movie that they made, and I'd say, hey, let me sell it, if it's a horror movie or something.
Right.
And then I'd say, but next time, would you just send the script ahead of time? Would you just talk to us? It's not about spending more money, but because most of these folks, most of them, I'd say, are not in LA.
Right.
So if you're in LA, you're in the midst of everything. You still need help, but if you're out of LA, you can make the movie and be very enthusiastic, but you don't necessarily know anybody in the business. And
True.
if you're here and you try making a movie, just your friends and everybody you know is going to let you know when you're off. Everybody's savvy. There's a film IQ, in LA that it's just almost in the air or something. People know everybody's doing something. But if you're in, Phoenix or Cleveland or, you don't know, there's nobody around to tell you that that's not a good idea. So anyway, we got into it so that we could get in on the micro budget stuff, and it's a lot of work, but luckily John does most of it. We're always looking for movies. So if you've got a horror movie and you need someone to distribute it, email us.
Good to know.
Yeah, Dark Arts Entertainment.
Dark Arts announced that they were partnering with MVD to be putting out. Is that for the physical side?
Yeah, we do the retail through MVD. There's physical, and if you're direct to consumer is a very, very big deal to set up.
Yeah.
So most companies, that aren't big enough to do that, go through MVD. MVD has different tiers of deals. So you get the one that works for you, and they get them out there. But that's basically considered retail when it's on Amazon and all that. And then to do streaming, MVD can do that, but there's a lot of different companies that you can deal with for streaming. And so it depends on the movie what the best way to go. And the main thing is not to lose money.
Right. Well, on that note, I'm obviously here on, physical media side of things, and we probably should finish this up with some really cool things. I mean, Ignite Films has been making some waves this year with a giant, just beautiful release of Reanimator, which obviously you had a big part in. And then they announced shortly after that was shipping that Bride is getting a similar sort of gigantic release from them. That is,
I don't think Bride would. Reanimator deserves a big 40 thing, and they did a great job. Actually, Eagle Rock and Ignite are the companies, and Eagle Rock is the company that actually took on the job of restoration, and produced it, and I think they also do delivery. Ignite is a distributor. They did without Eagle Rock. They did Invaders from Mars, the original one. They did a nice job of restoration.
Really
so it's but actually those companies and Unearth, the company that distributed Guyver, are all. There's one partner in common with all of them, who's also the guy who financed Society and Bride of the Reanimator with Wild Street Pictures back then.
He's got his hand in everything. Wow.
Well, he's one of the few guys in the movie business that doesn't really want to be on the set or get behind the camera or any of that stuff, But in any case, I think following up Reanimator with Bride this fall will be it'll get Bride more attention. See, I don't think Bride would get that much attention, if you waited a few years.
Right. I get that.
But But to go right into it, I think there'll be a lot of excitement.
I think the logical question for many people that love your work and love these films and physical media specifically is that possibly going to be followed up with Society shortly after that?
Well, what I'd like to do before, I would like to, I wish I owned Beyond Reanimator.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that would, it's got its charms.
Yeah.
But it'd be great. I always wanted to have a 3-pack. I've never.
Beautiful box set.
That's the problem when you make, these movies get scattered around. Like, I know I did a couple of the Silent Night, Deadly Nights, and I was kind of thrilled when Lionsgate came, or they called it Vestron.
Yeah. And
they came out with the pack, where you get all those crappy movies together.
Those crappy movies.
But they put out the 2 dentists in a pack.
They did, yeah.
And Corbin and I tried to make a third one. We could just never get him to give us the rights. But he loves that part. But anyway, I think I like that. I like getting all the packs together. I wish I owned Dagon. I think that would be
another one that got a Vestron treatment.
That fits in. And Necronomicon is just really sad that I can't get a hold of that, because that movie is never seen. And I think I'm not saying it's great, but man, it's got some cool stuff. I mean, Jeffrey Combs is playing H.P. Lovecraft, and he's made up to look like him. He's sort of an action hero. Yeah. I like Necronomicon a lot. I think it would do good,
It's underseen. A lot of people.
Pardon?
It's underseen. I feel like a lot of people would truly love it if just given the opportunity to see it.
Yeah. Where do you see it? I think the only way to see it is I think you can find it on YouTube.
I have an import. It was released over, I think, in Germany or something like that. Yeah. So I had to have it.
yeah. But I mean, the thing is it's not on streaming. It's
right.
It's owned by one of the production companies. It was financed by one half by a Japanese company and the other by a French company. And the French company licensed it North America to New Line, and then New Line didn't do anything with it. And then it just sat, because they made these, back then they'd make these deals there for 20 years, 25. So it just goes into a library. These are companies that aren't focused on churning their library. They're focused on making Hunger Games,
Yeah.
And the library is basically real estate. It's collateral for bank loans.
Yep.
So they don't have an interest. It's not worth their while to even sometimes license it out for someone else to put it out, because they got to get their lawyers to deal. It's sad. And the French company, I don't know, they don't have any interest in. I tried to get the Spanish rights when I was living in Spain.
I really just want to say thank you for all the time. I mean, we've been here almost 90 minutes, and you've been incredible, and some of the best stories. I mean, you are an idol for so many people that love physical media nowadays, and films that, people were raised on Society and Brian Reanimator, and it means so much. And, showing my kids Honey, I Shrunk the Kids was one of my defining moments. They loved it too.
Well, people, I'm starting to think I might start collecting Blu-rays and DVDs again. Because, I'm constantly paying money on VOD for movies I've seen 100 times. And they never lower the price.
Exactly.
And then if you think you can buy it on VOD, then that company goes out of business. Don't kid yourself.
Yep. Or they lose the license,
And so my friends usually the people I know that collect Blu-rays and DVDs, they have huge screens. They have huge projection.
Yeah.
And which I have projections. The cheapest, best way to watch movies. Don't carry those big, heavy things around, But I want to see a movie. I've got to go pay $5 for it. And I'm going, I used to own this movie on VHS, for Christ's sakes. It's not like it's. I was telling my wife just the other day because my grandson was over and we were watching a couple old movies, and we had to buy them. And I said, I should just start getting the Blu-rays. I should just, because if you look around, you get them on sale.
Oh yeah,
it won't cost you much more than renting them.
And then they're yours forever.
And you got it right there. You just go. Of course, you got to be a librarian, and you got to figure out a Dewey Decimal System or something.
That's true. So, speaking of that, like I was asking, do you think society is going to make its way from Eagle Rock and Ignite eventually?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. That one scene is enough to. I mean, it's like film school in just a couple minutes on screen to be able to show what you can do with. I mean, like you said, 12 men in a suit that can change somebody's life, and it impacted so many people. It's amazing.
Yeah, it definitely pays off. It's that sucker punch of a movie,
Yeah.
You just have to hang in there,
I agree, and it's one of those stories that pays off. I mean, you ask anybody if they're watching that movie, pause it 45 minutes into it. Tell me how this movie ends if you've never seen it. Nobody's going to ever guess that.
Hi, Mr. Yuzna.
Hello, Will.
So nice to talk with you. I have been a media studies professor at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro for about 20 years now. And I teach several of your movies. And
they pay you for that?
Not much, but I do get a stipend to get these. I get a little bit, but I teach society a lot, and the students really get into, as you were saying, the generations. They get into the aesthetic, and they also get into the themes. And when the pandemic ended, and we were first able to go back out into society, I went to a bar with a friend of mine, and this young man ran up to me saying, "Dr. Dodson, Dr. Dodson," and I realized he was a student that I'd had 6 or 7 years before, and he started to take his shirt off, and he got the shirt off, and he turned around and he showed me this, and I just wanted you to know that you have.
That's pretty funny. That's pretty funny.
You've truly left a mark on
society.
Yeah,
that's hilarious. Well, tell him good luck. He'll need it.
Thank you for watching The Disconnected. On the way out, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, that you've liked the video, and that you've copied the link to be able to share it with someone else that may appreciate this.